I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
Chapter 48. Seeking Help. 15th May 1991, the Kremlin, Moscow, USSR. Tariq Aziz was shown into Gorbachev's office and received a warm welcome. "Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Aziz said, extending his hand as he approached the Soviet leader. "It is good to see you, Mr. Aziz, but I wish it was under different circumstances. This exercise has not gone as we anticipated, even with the more modern equipment that we have provided," Gorbachev said, motioning for them to sit in the overstuffed chairs. "I welcome you to Moscow," he continued. "We see the goal of this conversation as finding out whether any new considerations have emerged from the Iraqi leadership that would facilitate the search for a political solution to the dangerous crisis in the Persian Gulf." "We are very much appreciative of anything that you could do," Aziz began, but Gorbachev cut him off mid-sentence. "With regard to Iraq, we have cooperated with you in the past and would like to preserve this cooperation. Our interest in this is clearly manifested in the fact of today's meeting. In addition, it is quite clear that if Iraq participates constructively in political efforts to untie the tight knot of problems that have emerged in the Persian Gulf region, then there will be one outcome. If there is no such participation, then everything, in my opinion, will end badly. Taking into account our relations in the past and present, I would like to say quite frankly that this conflict carries great danger. You can say that supposedly this assessment stems from the insufficiently courageous position of the Soviet Union. We don't think so. Our position is strong enough, but I cannot say that about the position of Iraq." The Soviet leader paused for a second before continuing. "The last thing we want would be to lose everything that has been created in our bilateral relations over years of cooperation. That is why, even in such an acute situation, we are in favor of dialogue for Iraq to participate in the search for a settlement. In a recent speech, I noted that the course of action of President Hussein is unacceptable to us, but for us, a massive, prolonged presence of U.S. troops in this area is also unacceptable. We are advocating a return to the original situation with the provision of the necessary security guarantees to all parties involved in the conflict. Of course, it would be preferable for us if the process of finding political solutions took place with the active participation of the Arabs. However, it has become increasingly clear that the Arab states are unable to agree among themselves. What are you going to tell me? As your friend, I advise you to move as quickly as possible to the search for political ways out of the crisis, because in the international arena, voices are ringing out more and more loudly, urging that harsh measures be applied to Iraq. It is clear what is meant by this. Are you comfortable with this? I cannot believe that the Iraqi leadership would be willing to abandon its people to the mercy of such a cruel fate." Gorbachev paused, taking a sip of the tea that had been served. The pause gave him an opportunity to see Aziz's reactions. Satisfied he was reading the foreign minister correctly, he continued. "Now, 3 possible scenarios have moved to the foreground. The first is the current situation, the military path. In our opinion, the one who makes the choice in favor of it is dangerously mistaken. It does not matter who we are talking about, President Bush and Prime Minister Thatcher, who have made many statements on this topic, or President Hussein. The second option is associated with the preservation, and most likely also the tightening, of the blockade of Iraq, which of course will place the heaviest burden on the Iraqi people. Ultimately, it is inhumane, and indeed simply cruel towards the Iraqis, to whom it offers bitter suffering. Even if the sympathies of the Arabs will trend more and more in favor of Iraq, even if the Arab countries view the victims of the Iraqi people with sympathy, this path is extremely difficult, and most importantly, it does not contain structural elements and does not lead to a way out of the crisis. In short, it is realistically only possible to speak of the third option, which involves a serious search for a political solution. This alone, in our opinion, meets the interests of Iraq and will curtail the current situation. We will persistently argue against a military option and convince Bush of its danger and futility. However, frankly speaking, this requires constructive, realistic steps on your part. It was about these that we had expected to hear when we approached President Hussein with the question of whether there were new developments in the Iraqi position. Do you have any new proposals? The Americans do not want us to take on a mediating role yet. We told them that the process of finding solutions does not exclude the use of mediation missions, although we did not specify whose missions we were referring to. We appreciate that our dialogue with Iraq continues, despite the severity of the situation. We do not wish ill upon Iraq. However, there is the logic of history, the logic of development, with which both you and we must agree. You should take such a factor as public opinion into consideration. Our public opinion is very alarmed by the events in the Persian Gulf, and we must admit that there are grounds for concern. In the future, it will be much more difficult for us to placate this anxiety. What do you say? What did you come here with? Gorbachev asked. Aziz took a deep breath. I need to make our case now, he thought. We in Iraq were fully confident of our strength and did not fear a confrontation with the Americans. At the same time, we recognized that such confrontation could lead to an extensive conflict along all the lines, consequences of which would affect not only our Arab region, but the entire world. However, such a prospect did not scare us. The Americans deceived themselves when they talked about a possibility of conducting a so-called surgical operation against Iraq. Deciding to undertake something like this, then, is giving them a long and a very bitter conflict, which could turn everything upside down in this region of the globe. We, on our part, as revolutionaries, naturally, are not afraid of such an outcome, and are prepared to make sacrifices for months, even years, if that is what it takes. Peace for us is a sacred goal. We are talking about peace in which our security would be guaranteed, Aziz said, as he paused to sip his tea. A game of statesmanship was being played. Who would blink first? Aziz continued. Life itself put the entire complex of problems on our agenda, and we should resolve them together. I have in mind the Palestinian problem and the Israeli occupation of the Arab lands, suffocating economic conditions in which many Arab states found themselves, a scandalous gap between the rich and the poor in the Arab world, the tragic situation in Lebanon, and a mass of other problems. The entire Arab world, from Iraq in the east to Morocco in the west, is seething. Arabs are no longer able to wait, Aziz concluded forcefully. Gorbachev smiled. Aziz has lost his cleverness, as they say. We have been persistently looking for many years for a key to solving the most important problems of the Middle East, particularly the Palestinian problem and the Arab-Israeli conflict in general, and the complicated entanglement of the Lebanese crisis. However, a way out has still not been found. Now, after the actions committed by Iraq, the task has become a great deal more complex. Finding a solution to the region's problems has become even more difficult. In essence, you gave very strong arguments to the Americans for building up their military presence in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. American troops won't just leave the area. We see that Japan and Saudi Arabia are already joining in their funding. so the United States has achieved its goal. The fact that Kuwait was occupied and then ultimately declared the 19th province of Iraq gives an additional reason for the strengthening of the American military presence in the land of the Arabs, for the entanglement of the Western partners of the U.S. in this. The United States is also using the fact that Iraq promised President Mubarak not to commit military action against Kuwait, but broke this promise and deceived the Egyptians. The Americans told the world that Iraq could not be trusted, and Iraq has proven their point, Gorbachev said, and could see from Aziz's facial expression that he had scored. Aziz began to protest, but did not get the first word out when Gorbachev continued. Frankly speaking, you do not leave us any other choice. We really would not like to see Iraq in total isolation, and we are taking this into consideration in our practical steps. It is possible that you receive instructions from the Supreme Being, but I would like to give you some advice, and it is up to you to decide to use it or not. We believe that we must not give up the search for a political solution on a realistic, constructive basis. So far, I feel, you are not ready for this. But it would be wise to consider that in the future the situation will only get worse. There is a limit beyond which the people will no longer be able to bear sacrifices, suffer adversity, and hardship. Then it might present a bill to its leadership. I think that this is not the result you aspire to. There is a play by Shatter, The Brest Peace, that is playing now in the Soviet Union. In that play, the director used the following scene. Lenin, trying to persuade the head of our delegation at the negotiations in Brest, Trotsky, to conclude the peace treaty with the Germans, says that he was ready to practically plead on his knees. It was a critical moment in our history, when they had to save our revolution. Later, they had to conclude the peace treaty anyway, but with much harsher conditions. Lenin even called that peace treaty bawdy. We had a lively exchange of opinions. I cannot say that I am satisfied with what I heard. It would be preferable if the Iraqi side came up with new approaches. You only presented the known positions. That is why we have different assessments of this meeting. But we are not rejecting the contacts. Give President Hussein my greetings. Gorbachev shook his head in frustration as he ended his meeting with the Iraqi representative. They had given the Iraqis every possible chance to achieve a victory, but they chose to not pursue from a position of strength. Now they are on the cusp of defeat and want us to intervene to save them. I need to speak to our generals and have the last of our advisors pulled out of Iraq. We have all gambled, and we have lost. It is time to cut our losses and pull our people back before this escalates any further, the Soviet leader thought, and get that damn kilo sub we sold to Iran back in port someplace. Chapter 49. Decisions. 15th May, 1991. Oval Office, White House, Washington, D.C. The president had been maintaining a hands-off approach to telling General Schwarzkopf what to do and what not to do. He really didn't want to know the minor details. Now, however, the SecDef and SecState were asking for a decision on what the endgame was going to be, and he needed to give them an answer. "Send them in," the president said, speaking into his intercom. The door opened, and the SecDef and SecState entered, with General Powell behind them. Cheney entered as well. "Mr. President, I have asked General Powell to join us." "That's fine. Have a seat, gentlemen." The president motioned, coming from behind the resolute desk and taking his usual single chair just as the side door opened and a steward entered with a tray and 4 cups along with the pot of coffee. He placed them on the coffee table and departed. Powell took the pot and poured 4 cups, passing them to each man. All drank theirs black with no sugar. Mr. Cheney began the meeting by bringing them up to speed on where things sat in the Gulf. "Mr. President, The actions in the Gulf are moving rapidly, with Saddam's force pulling back into Kuwait and Iraqi. That 2-day sandstorm gave him an opportunity to run without us on his backside. He has pulled most of his forces back into defensive positions along the Kuwait-Saudi border and some forces along the Iraq-Saudi border. His navy has been swept from the Gulf or is tied up in ports in Kuwait and the one port in Iraq and not venturing into the Gulf. His air force is hunkering down in airfields scattered around Iraq, but is still a formidable force if they surge. His army has been mauled pretty good, but is still a fighting force. So what you're telling me, Dick, is that he isn't defeated yet, and could come back in the near future once we run him out of Kuwait, the president summarized. Mr. President, if he decides that the pressure is too great and does pull out of Kuwait back into Iraq, yes, he will be left with a sizable force capable of rolling right back into Kuwait after we leave the area. We will be doing Gulf War II. Do you think he's going to pull out of Kuwait? The president asked. Sir, we have no indication to support that opinion, Cheney responded. But he looked to Jim Baker. Mr. President, I have it on good authority that Tariq Aziz is flying to Moscow today to meet with Mr. Gorbachev. We believe the purpose of the meeting is to have the Russians propose a ceasefire with the Iraqis retaining Kuwait, or at least an annual payment from Kuwait for their intrusion into the Rumaila oil field with their slant well drilling, Mr. Baker said, placing his coffee down on the table between them. How do we know he's going to Moscow? The president inquired, sipping his coffee. We got word from the Swiss as they didn't want us to shoot his plane down. They'll let us know when he's flying back, Baker responded. Mr. President, we need to tell General Schwarzkopf what his final object is, and soon. He's been pushing the Iraqis out of Saudi Arabia and closing in on Kuwait, but he needs to have a final objective to plan the continuation of his campaign, Colin Powell interjected. Bush paused in thought for a moment before answering. Colin is right, but I need to see what the results of Tariq's meeting with Gorbachev are. It may result in a complete withdrawal and end the fighting. I've just got to wait and see. Gentlemen, I understand that we need to give a final objective to General Schwarzkopf, but let's wait to see what the Russians propose. I don't want to cut Gorbachev off at the knees when he may offer a viable alternative. A few more days won't make a difference to General Schwarzkopf. Dick, get the general on the phone and I'll talk to him. Anything else? The president asked as he stood, signaling that the meeting was over. General Schwarzkopf, let me congratulate you on your success in this campaign, the president said. General Schwarzkopf waited for the other shoe to fall. Thank you, sir. But we still have a ways to go, he replied cautiously. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I want you to pause the attack for a few days. Aziz is in Moscow meeting with Gorbachev, and I want us to see what comes out of that meeting. Gorbachev may come up with a viable alternative to ending this fight and get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. A few-day pause won't hurt your ground plan, will it? You can still run the air campaign, but I want you to hold off on charging into Kuwait or Iraq. Conduct reconnaissance operations, but not a full-blown attack. Is that a problem? Sir, Stormin Norman said, attempting to keep his voice under control as his blood pressure rose. A pause of a few days will allow the Iraqis to rearm, refuel, and reinforce their forces. If Gorbachev does offer a plan that leaves the Iraqi army intact, we could very well be looking at coming back here in a couple of years when he tries this again, having learned the lessons already. I'll follow your orders, sir, but I believe a pause like this may be costly to us in terms of lives. I understand, General, and you make a good point. We'll get back to you just as soon as we evaluate the situation. Have a good day, the president said as he hung up the phone. I don't care if you don't like it. I'm the president and I give the orders. Son of a bitch, could be heard down the hall coming from General Schwarzkopf's office. No one wanted to venture into that cave for fear of being shot on the spot. Finally, Major General Schless built up the nerve to do so. Sir, I take it your conversation with the president wasn't what you wanted to hear, Schless said. No, damn it, it was not. Get Pegasus in here. I need to talk to both of you, Schwarzkopf directed. 20 minutes later, both general officers reluctantly entered Schwarzkopf's office. Here's the thing. The president wants us to hold off on rolling into Iraq and Kuwait. Seems the Iraqis are having a meeting with Gorbachev, and he wants to see what comes out of that meeting before we cross over. Damn politics! It'll screw up a great military campaign every damn time, Schwarzkopf fumed. Sir, I'll get an order out right away having all forces hold in place. We can still move to our tactical assembly areas, right? Schless asked. Yeah, and they can continue to conduct reconnaissance of the Iraqi defenses, but no major engagements. The air campaign continues, Schwarzkopf indicated. There was a moment of silence before General Pegasus spoke up. Sir, this may not be a bad thing. How do you figure? Schwarzkopf asked. Sir, we've rolled across Saudi and the UAE in record time. We have the logistics to support the operation, but we're at the end of a very long logistical tail. Our supply trucks have done yeoman work, but are starting to show the effects of long hours and long hauls. With this pause, we can get the port of Dammam opened and begin supplying from there instead of having to bring everything up from Oman. This will give us an opportunity to push forward supplies to the units in a more timely manner, especially fuel and ammo. I was going to come to you and tell you that we were going to have to pause when we got to the Euphrates River, but now we can resupply here and be prepared to go all the way to Baghdad without a pause. There's a silver lining here, General Pegasus explained as he tried to lighten his mood. Schwarzkopf thought about it for a moment. All right, let's use this time for resupply and maintenance. Tell the commanders they have 2 days as of right now to refuel and rearm before we order the attack to continue. How soon can the port of Dammam be opened? Sir, the first ship arrived there this morning and is being unloaded. The refinery at Al Jubail is pumping diesel fuel to our tanker trucks as we speak, Pegasus said. Schwarzkopf just smiled and dismissed them with a hand wave. The 7th Corps had great combat power, 5 armor mechanized divisions and a cavalry regiment. Supporting them were also Corps artillery units, to include multiple rocket launcher batteries and attack helicopters. General, we always knew that the logistical tail was going to be the weak point, but not this bad. The attack is going so successfully and so quickly that unless we change our tactics a bit, we're going to have to pause to get things caught up, Colonel Cherry said. So what do our logistic requirements look like right now? General Franks asked. What did we eat up yesterday? Cherry looked over at Brigadier General Holt, the Corps G4, responsible for logistic planning. Sir, we've fielded 142,000 soldiers, which means a minimum of 142,000 MREs, if everyone only gets one a day. We have 48,000 vehicles and aircraft with 1,587 tanks, 1,500 Bradley and Cav fighting vehicles, 600 artillery tubes, and 223 attack helicopters. Yesterday we used 5.6 million gallons of fuel, consumed 3.3 million gallons of water, and fired 6,000 rounds of tank, artillery, and large-caliber ammunition. Right now, trucks and CH-47 aircraft are moving all that again today, General Holt explained. How close are we to what we planned? Frank pressed, sensing a problem developing. Sir, if we go by the schoolhouse textbook for combat consumption, we would have far exceeded the numbers. But watching what we were using back in Oman for training, and what we've used on a daily basis since we crossed into the UAE, we're pretty much on track, Holt said. So, what's the problem? Franks questioned. The problem is turnaround for delivery back to depots to reload and get back to the front. Units are running out of supplies before the transportation can drop off, get back to the depot, reload, and get back to the unit. And the further we get from Oman, the more acute the problem is going to be, Holt pointed out. So what's the solution? Surely you brought me a solution along with this problem, Franks commented. Yes, sir, but you may not like it, Holt said hesitantly. Try me, was Franks's only response. Sir, if we could cut back on the artillery shooting, then we can solve part of this problem, Cherry said. Franks gave him the okay. Explain this one? Colonel, look. Sir, we've been pounding the hell out of everything with artillery. If an attack helicopter finds a target and fires on it, they then adjust artillery on the same target that they just killed. If a Bradley platoon takes out a bunker complex, they pound it with artillery before they continue. We're wasting a lot of artillery ammo, sir. Instead of every battery firing on the same target, we only need one battery to fire on each target. The artillery guys are treating this as a massive live-fire exercise back at Fort Bliss, or Hood if you ask me, and we're chewing through ammo like this is World War II. Sir, General Holt said, jumping into the conversation. The other thing we could do, sir, is have half of the artillery displacing forward while half remain in firing positions and refuel and rearm at the same time. That way the logistic tail won't be chasing after the people on the move. The artillery batteries can leapfrog past each other as they are resupplied. Well, you two have succinctly laid out the problem and the solution. I don't like either, but understand the need. Okay, implement your plan, but get back to me tomorrow and let me know how it's going. Remember, fighters win battles, but logistics wins wars. I'll talk to General Yosak about this and see what's being done to push the logistics. The next afternoon, the gang of 3 were again knocking on the president's door. The president didn't rise to meet them and didn't offer them a chair. If they sit down, they'll never get out of here, and a 10-minute meeting will become an hour, the president thought privately. Barbara had told him in no uncertain terms that he was not to be late for the state dinner that night. Baker was the first to speak up. Mr. President, we have a good idea of what Aziz was told by Gorbachev. It appears the Russians are not happy with how the whole thing was handled, despite them providing equipment and advisors at the outset. We now believe the Russians felt he was going only into Kuwait and not Saudi Arabia or the UAE. Gorbachev told him to basically sue for peace on our terms, that they would get no more assistance from the Soviet Union. Well, that's good news. Now are we seeing anything out of Saddam to show that he's listening? The president asked, steepling his fingers on his desk. No, sir. In fact, he's moving supplies into Kuwait and shoring up his defenses, Powell answered. Sir, we really need to give General Schwarzkopf some guidance on the final objective, so he knows how and what to plan on doing next, Cheney almost pleaded. Baker interjected, Sir, we may have another problem, as all eyes turned to him. And what might that be, Jim? Sir, I'm getting some rumblings out of the Turks about their feelings on the invasion of Iraq. Seems they feel if Saddam is removed, it'll have a destabilizing impact on the Middle East, Baker said. Translation? The president pressed, a frown starting to appear on his face. Translation is they believe if we topple Saddam, then they alone are going to have to deal with the Kurds. They like the idea that he keeps his thumb on some of them, and they don't have to deal with the whole Kurdish issue alone. What do you think they'll do if we do take him down? Cheney asked. They could kick us out of our air bases in Turkey. They could drop out of NATO. I would call their bluff on those 2 options, Cheney interrupted. The air bases bring in some very nice revenue to the Turks, and as long as Greece stays in NATO, the Turks will stay if for no other reason than to make life miserable for anything the Greeks want to accomplish. The 2 hate each other beyond words. All right, tell Schwarzkopf that his final objective is Baghdad and the seizure of Saddam. Enough of this screwing around. If we don't take him and his army down, we're going to be right back here in 5 to 10 years. If by some miracle Saddam comes to his senses and sues for peace, we can always curtail operations. Oh, as far as bombing inside Iraq goes, all military and government targets are on the table. Let's be careful with hitting the civilian population, but military and government targets are fair game. Anything else? The president asked, indicating they shouldn't say anything further. All right, get out of here or I'm going to be negotiating with Barbara, and I always lose those negotiations. Chapter 50. The ball is rolling. 20th of May, 1991. 3 to 327th Infantry. Tactical Assembly Area. Campbell, Saudi Arabia. Lieutenant Colonel Ray Fitzgerald deplaned from the C-130 while its engines were still running. The flight was a short one, from Tabuk to Rafah. His battalion was one of the first to arrive and was being assembled on the north side of the runway where a column of trucks were waiting. Asking soldiers of the 82nd to load trucks in anticipation of combat wasn't something a commander wanted to do, especially as the rear elements of the 1st Brigade, 101st Airborne Division, were co-located at the airport. The grunts had already flown to the tactical assembly areas they were occupying just south of the Iraqi border. The jeering between the Screaming Eagles of the 101st and the Sky Soldiers of the 82nd was common, but someone from another organization best not jeer either, as both would turn on them like a snake on a mouse. "Ray! Ray Fitzgerald!" a voice called out. Ray turned to see where the voice was coming from, and saw an approaching soldier waving his arm and looking at him. As the soldier got closer, Ray recognized him. "Corey, is that you? Damn, what are you doing here?" Ray said, extending his hand. Ray and Corey had lived in the same fourplex at Fort Benning in the mid-1970s. Their kids had played with each other and gone to school together. Ray had even purchased Corey's skydiving gear when Corey had moved up to a new rig that had nearly gotten him killed and put him in the hospital for 2 weeks. "I command a battalion in the 101st. We flew in here yesterday. I'm just back here getting some commo gear in my vehicle checked out." "You?" Corey asked. "Same. Commanding a battalion in the 82nd. I guess we're moving into an assembly area as well. Hopefully we'll be making a drop in Iraq. Have you heard anything?" Ray inquired of his friend. Corey shrugged his shoulders. "I know my first objective. Planning for 2 other contingency missions, though. I've been given a final objective. Can't say where, but I think we'll both be arriving there by air at about the same time." "Well, you know a hell of a lot more than me. We were told to get here, and we'd be told later. Hey, I have to go. Good seeing you. Take care, and hope to see you on the other side," Ray said, holding out his hand, which Corey took. TAA Campbell was the jump-off point for the 101st into Iraq. It was also 9 kilometers from the Iraqi border. A Saudi border guard post was 1 click from the Iraqi border, with a similar border guard outpost on the Iraqi side. From a distance, both looked like the French Foreign Legion forts of the 1930s movies. Corey was the first to go up to the Saudi border post and was quickly greeted and accepted by the commander there. The Saudis that had returned to man the post were very happy to have the American units around them. So happy they invited Corey to leave a team there with a radio for joint communications. When Corey arrived in the AO, it was after dark, and it wasn't until the next day that he had an opportunity to get the lay of the land. On the battalion's right flank was 2 187th Infantry, and on the left flank was 2 the 327th. The battalions of the 2nd Brigade, 502nd Regiment, were located behind the 2 forward brigades. Colonel Hall had a morning commander's call and an evening commander's call. His 3 infantry battalion commanders were always present, along with Lieutenant Colonel Lynn Hartzell, the artillery battalion commander. "Okay, here's the deal. We're going to depart here and fly about 110 miles into Iraq and establish an FOB, FOB Cobra. Basically, we're going to be a gas station for the attack helicopters and a waypoint for the 3rd Brigade to pass through as they leapfrog north to the area around Az-Samawa. Corey, you have a be-prepared mission to go with them. You need to get with Colonel Clark and see what he might have for you," Hall said. Corey just jotted notes and shook his head. "When we get to Cobra, Corey, you have from 12 to 3 on the perimeter. Jim, you will have from 3 to 6, Thomas 6 to 9, and Frank from 9 to 12. Any questions?" Hall asked. No one had, as they had been individually consulted by the Brigade S3. "Okay then, I'll see you guys in the morning," Hall said, standing up. "One question, sir. When are we launching into Iraq?" Thomas asked. "Good question, and I don't know. The Air Force is softening up the area with airstrikes, hitting his units, his infrastructure, and airfields. When Schwarzkopf feels confident that the Air Force has pounded them sufficiently, then we go over," Hall said. "Sir, do we know our final objective yet?" Corey asked. This was the question they all wanted answered. Hall looked first at the ground, lost in thought, When he looked up, he saw 4 sets of eyeballs staring at him, seeking an answer. "Keep this to yourselves, but as Samawa is only 147 miles southeast of the Baghdad International Airport," Hall explained. Everyone responded with wide grins. "See?" Chapter 51. Khafji. 22. May 1991. T.F. Shepard, Khafji, Saudi Arabia. T.F. Shepard had been tasked by division with providing a general outpost screen along the Saudi-Kuwait border in the division sector. Each of the 4 companies had a section of lavats with their thermal night sights, Tau missiles, and 25mm cannons. "Captain Pollard, I want you to move your company to a position 4 kilometers northwest of this police station. The reconnaissance platoon leader is there to coordinate with you," Lieutenant Colonel Myers directed. Captain Pollard commanded Delta Company, part of 7th MEB, and had only recently joined T.F. Shepard, Lieutenant Colonel Myers's command. When Pollard arrived at the police station, he made the coordination with the recon platoon leader and moved his company into position. The position was 4,000 meters long, and he covered that with his 13 LAV-25s, 7 LAV-ATs, and his command vehicle, and LAV-C2. Once everyone was in position and had been checked by Captain Pollard, they all settled in for a quiet night. "Charger 6, Night 2 over," the recon platoon leader called Pollard. "Night 2, Charger 6, over," Pollard responded. "Charger 6, we have a column of 30, I say again 30, armored vehicles moving towards the police station. Over," the platoon leader indicated in a surprisingly calm voice. Pollard immediately switched radios and notified Lieutenant Colonel Myers, who passed the information up the chain of command. Soon Myers was back on the radio, wanting more information. "Night 2, Charger 6, over." "Charger 6, Night 2. I was just about to call you. We now have 5, I say again, 5, Tango 6-2 and several Bravo Mike Papa with infantry moving on the police station with the recon platoon. Recon is engaging. Request TAC air, over." As the platoon leader watched, his recon platoon engaged the Iraqi vehicles with what little anti-armor capability they had, which wasn't much. Law rockets, AT-4, and M203 rounds weren't much of a match against BMPs and tanks. "Charger 6, Night 2. We need to vacate this property. Am pulling back," Night 2 reported. "Roger, we will cover. Break. Charger elements, engage." On that command, the right side of Delta Company that was within range of the Iraqi force opened fire with their tow weapons systems, while Colonel Myers was adjusting artillery on the approaching column. As Pollard watched, reports of more Iraqi vehicles were received from his own platoons, which he passed on to Myers. "Shepard 6, Charger 6, over." "Charger 6, Shepard 6, go," Myers said, tension thick in his voice. "Shepard 6, we have a large force at the police station, and it appears that they're attempting to move back into Saudi. Over." "Charger 6, understood. Requesting air support now." "Stand by," Myers instructed. "Stand by my ass," Pollard thought. "I've got to move some vehicles to within range of these guys." Immediately he was on the company command net. "Pawn 2, Charger 6, over." "Charger 6, Pawn 2, Lieutenant Williams, the first platoon leader, answered. "Pawn 2, I want you to reorient to engage those people at the police station. Break, Bishop 2, Charger 6. Charger 6, Bishop 2, over." "Bishop 2, occupy a position to the right of Pawn 2. Engage when they're within range. How copy?" "Charger 6, good copy. Moving now." Captain Pollard watched as the platoons reoriented their positions, and the LAV-AT vehicles did likewise. However, he didn't see the recon platoon moving from the police station. In fact, the firefight within the police station compound was still intense. Night 2, Charger 6. Are you out of there yet? Over. Negative. We haven't been able to break contact. We're almost out of ammo. Over. Roger, wait one. Break. All Charger elements. Engage. On that command, all the vehicles in Delta opened fire on the Iraqi force. A tank blew up almost immediately and burned, providing an excellent reference point for future airstrikes. However, 3 more T-55 tanks emerged from the darkness and began engaging the recon platoon. Shit! I've got to get those guys out of there. Bishop 2, Charger 2. Bishop 2, go ahead. Bishop 2, form up on me. Break Pawn 2, remain in position and provide cover fire. Pawn 2, Roger. Pollard gave his driver the go-ahead, and they moved out to lead the 2nd platoon towards the police station. As they moved forward, Pollard observed the actions at the police station compound and had to make snap decisions. Bishop 2, hold position and engage, Pollard ordered. Immediately, TOW missiles and 25mm fire raked into the Iraqi forces. An Iraqi tank exploded, but so did one of his LAV AT-5 vehicles. Then a second T-55 was hit and destroyed, which halted the Iraqi attack for a moment. This provided time for the recon platoon leader to break contact and vacate the police station compound. As the night fighting continued with the Iraqis occupying the compound, which offered some cover and concealment, it became more difficult to identify their positions. Muzzle flashes provided the location of the enemy forces, but that was all. This is a damn dogfight with them in cover and concealed positions. Got to make some adjustments and work some options, Pollard thought, as he inflicted some casualties on the Iraqi forces, but also took some of his own. Assessing the situation, Pollard began giving commands. Pawn 2, Charger 6, over. Charger 6, Pawn 2, over, Lieutenant Williams responded. Pawn 2, I want you to come up on the right flank of Bishop. Break, Bishop 2, Charger 6, over. Charger 6, Bishop 2, over. Bishop 2, hold your position. Pawn 2 is coming up on your right flank, over. Roger, Charger 6. Charger 6, Pawn 2 is on the move. Looking through his nods, Captain Pollard could see the 1st platoon moving into position on the right flank of the 2nd platoon. As the platoons were now 3,000 meters from the police station compound, and all vehicles were on line, to include the LAV ATs, which were scattered throughout the company, Pollard was able to engage the Iraqi forces with all of his 25mm cannons and TOWs without fear of a fratricide situation. The firefight continued. Captain, we have TAC air on station, Pollard's forward air controller told him. Good. Send him after any tanks he can see around that burning tank, Pollard instructed the young man. Pollard watched for the plane. The night sky was too dark to see the aircraft, but he could see the damage it was inflicting with guided bombs. He could tell right away it wasn't an Air Force A-10, which was the preferred close air support aircraft, but it would do for right now. Pollard was aware that his 25mm cannons couldn't penetrate the T-55's armor, but they would separate the BMPs from the tanks. In addition, the ricocheting bullets were marking the targets for additional airstrikes that were arriving on station. Captain, I have another flight of aircraft on station. A-10s this time, the FAC said. They want us to mark targets, as they say our tracers are insufficient for them to identify them. They can drop a flare and adjust off that, the FAC indicated. Fine, have them drop it and we'll adjust, Pollard ordered. Within minutes, the distinctive sound of the A-10 could be heard as it made a low pass and dropped its flare. Instead of landing forward of position, however, it landed in his position. Banshee 4-5, the FAC called to indicate the enemy's positions in relation to the flare. Before he received a response, an LAV-25, in close proximity to the flare, exploded. Son of a bitch! Pollard yelled. Pawn 2, did you just lose a vehicle? Pollard screamed into the radio. Roger, Charger 6, the A-10 hit us. Turning to the FAC, Pollard said, Call those bastards off. They're hitting us, damn it! While Pollard was sorting out the loss of another LAV-25, and, more importantly, the crews and Marines, the Iraqi forces began to back off. Pollard was able to disengage his company, moving 1,000 meters further away and linked up with Company A, which allowed him to rearm, refuel his company, and care for the casualties. The battle for Khafji would continue for another day before Iraqi forces retreated. Chapter 52. It is time. 24 May, 1991. CENTCOM HQ, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. The meeting had been called the night before. Phone lines between Riyadh and Washington had been busy all night. Suspected but not confirmed, a phone call had also been made to the Kremlin in the late hours of the night. Decisions had been made. Mr. President, I feel that the time has come that we end this affair. My forces are in place and are rearmed and refueled. Indications are that our air campaign has sufficiently degraded the Iraqi forces. I'd like to launch the ground offensive the day after tomorrow and end this war, General Schwarzkopf said. Okay, how do you visualize this going down, General? The President asked. Sir, I've moved our amphibious fleet off the coast of Kuwait as part of a deception plan. That'll hold 2, maybe 3 of his divisions in place on the coast. The Joint Forces Command East will attack north along the coast. The Marine Central Command will attack north and east alongside Command East. Joint Forces Command North will attack north and swing east above Marine Central Command. Army Central Command has 7 Corps and Sotait Airborne Corps. 7 Corps will drive north, then turn east, attacking into northern Kuwait and southern Iraq. The Sotait Airborne Corps attacks north to the Euphrates River, blocks reinforcements seizing the bridges over the Euphrates River, and prevents the withdrawal of Iraqi forces. Once this is completed, we'll move on to the next phase and be well positioned to continue the attack, Schwarzkopf summarized. Has General Bilal taken command of host nation forces under Joint Forces Command North? The President inquired. He has, sir, but I can tell you General Smith is not happy about it, Schwarzkopf indicated. I can understand that he might not be, but politics trumps personal and professional feelings on this, the President replied. A voice in the background could be heard. Mr. President, we want to be very careful about continuing the attack, Powell said. We have indicated that our objective was to remove Iraqi forces from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. If we push it further, we're subject to global criticism. Ever the damn politician, John Sununu thought as he sat and listened to Powell. Mr. President, let me point out that Saddam still has a large stockpile of chemical weapons and isn't afraid to employ them on his own people. If we continue the attack further, he may see no reason not to employ them on our forces as well, Powell continued. General Powell, Sununu said, cutting Powell off. Have we seen any indications that he's moving his chemical weapons from their storage facilities? No, and we've been watching those sites very closely. I say we continue with the plans until such time as we get an indication that he might be doing that. The President turned to Jim Baker. Jim, what do you think? Sir, the world community finds Saddam to be a pain in the ass, but a good puppet to some, such as the Soviets. Most nations want this conflict to end and end quickly, but they don't want to see Saddam in a position of power when it's over. The Saudis feel that if he's left in power, then he can come back and do this again. The Israelis definitely want him out before his Scud missiles start coming over with chemical weapons on board. The Middle East would be a quieter place without him, Baker explained. Who do you think would take his place? If we remove him, are we replacing him with something worse? The President asked. Sir, that's the million-dollar question. We just don't know unless we occupy the country. And do we really want to do that? Cheney asked. Hearing this background conversation was driving Schwarzkopf insane. All I want is a freaking go-ahead to launch the ground offensive into Iraq. This crap should have been asked and answered months ago. Excuse me, gentlemen. Right now, I need an answer on the immediate question. Can I launch the ground offensive into Iraq the day after tomorrow? When that phase is completed, then these other questions can be decided, Schwarzkopf said, attempting to cover his rising anger at the lack of decisions. Mr. President, may I suggest that we send a communique to Saddam through the Swiss and ask one more time for him to withdraw his forces from Kuwait? Powell asked. Before the president could respond, Schwarzkopf had heard enough. Mr. President, the longer we delay, the more damage he's going to do to Kuwait. The oil fields are already a towering inferno, and each day he destroys another 50 or so wellheads. He's already released oil into the Gulf, which we were able to shut off with a missile strike. He has mined the Kuwaiti coast for miles and robbed the city of anything that wasn't nailed down. How much more damage are we going to allow? Sir, the time to launch is now, Schwarzkopf said, allowing his tone to demonstrate his displeasure with those in Washington. There was silence from the Washington side, and Schwarzkopf thought for a minute that they had been disconnected. Finally, the president spoke up. General, you may proceed. Launch the attack the day after tomorrow, and may God be with you. Chapter 53. Air Assault. 26 May 1991. Day 1, G-Day, Saudi Arabia. The 60 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, along with CH-47 Chinooks and AH-64 attack helicopters, had been made ready the night before. Soldiers of the 1st Brigade, 101st Airborne Division, rehearsed exiting the aircraft with 15 infantry soldiers per aircraft for the most part, and then slept next to the aircraft. For replacements or newbies, this was their first combat air assault. The assault was scheduled for an 00400 takeoff. Everyone wanted to be on this assault, even the cooks for the 327th Battalion. They had volunteered to be stretcher bearers, and at first Corey had turned them down, but when he'd seen the confidence in the infantry soldiers move up a notch, knowing that stretcher bearers were going, he'd decided to let them participate. The 400 launch time had come and gone, and still they sat on the ground. Fog in the objective area was the reason. Pathfinders had been inserted the night before, and were reporting the weather conditions in the area. Finally, at 5:30, the pilots began to crank the aircraft. The flight to the objective was quick, being only 110 miles inside Iraq. The flight altitude was 50 feet, and at the speed they were flying, they passed over isolated pockets of Iraqi troops before they even knew the aircraft were coming. No one shot at the aircraft, nor did the aircraft shoot at anyone. The aircraft put the battalion right on the spot for the 3 landing zones the battalion was using. Almost immediately afterwards, 5 CH-47 aircraft came in hauling 8 TOW-equipped Humvees and 2 command and control vehicles, one being the S-3's vehicle and the other the TACP vehicle. Within the hour, Battle Force had captured 10 Iraqi soldiers in 2 positions. Now it was time to wait for link-up with the brigade's ground convoy and elements of the 24th Mechanized Division, which was scheduled to cross the border that night. The dust from the CH-47 as it lifted off made it impossible to see. It had deposited Command Sergeant Major Bob Nichols and 8 soldiers, along with 8 motorcycles and 1 Humvee. They were alone, unable to see anyone or anything in the open desert. All right, let's set up a defensive position. Motorcycles in the center, Nichols directed. The soldiers immediately went to work digging foxholes and camouflaging their position. If things went according to plan, the ground convoy would arrive in 4 or 5 hours. When it did, motorcycle riders would lead each element to where the respective ground unit was located. Sergeant Major, a soldier said, gaining the command sergeant major's attention. Just how big is this objective Cobra? I see helicopters landing off in the distance, but just how big from one side to the other? Collins, do you think we would have motorcycles if we could just have you walk to where each unit is located? Nichols asked. No, Sergeant Major, the young soldier answered with a sheepish look. All right, everyone, gather around and get your maps out, Nichols ordered, spreading his map out on the hood of his Humvee. Once everyone had their maps out, Nichols began to point out the necessary features. We're located right here. Mark that on your maps. When all had done so, he said, At this point, he pointed and read off the coordinates, is the artillery location. Mark it. He continued indicating the location of the perimeter infantry units, the brigade element location, the aircraft refueling point, and other lesser unit locations within Objective Cobra. Okay, now that you have everyone plotted, how far across is the objective? Nichols asked, looking at Collins. Damn, that's 20 miles across, Collins exclaimed. Okay, now, as each unit comes here, if they need a guide, you'll take them to where they need to go. Some will have a leader with a GPS tracker so they can find their way without a guide, but some won't, and it'll be up to us to get them to the right location. Any questions? Nichols asked. As he was talking, the sounds of gunfire could be heard to the northeast. Sounds like someone has made contact, Sergeant Major, Specialist McFarland observed. That's in Battle Force's area. He's over there. Bastonia Bulldogs are on his left and First Strike is on the right flank. No slack is to the left of Bastonia. Wonder what Battle Force got into? Nichols mumbled. Battle Force 6, Gladiator 6, Captain Mulford called on the battalion command net. Go, Gladiator 6. Battle Force 6, we have a bunker and are engaging. Over. How many people do you have in the bunker? Give me types of weapons, too. Lieutenant Colonel Corey could hear the distinct sound of AK-47 fire, but also the rapid fire of a PKM machine gun. He also knew that Mulford was busy and wouldn't be talking on the radio until the action was over. Corey would just have to wait. Reaching for the brigade command net radio hand mic, he called Colonel Hall. Bastonia 6, Battle Force 6. Battle Force 6, go ahead. Due to the distances, each infantry battalion could hear Bastonia talking back to a call, but could only receive one side of the conversation. The distances were just too great for a battalion to communicate with another battalion. Bastonia 6, we have contact in Alpha Sector. Small force in a bunker. We'll send an after-action when complete. Over. Battle Force 6, you are the first to report contact. Keep us posted. Out. He didn't seem too concerned, sir, Major Wells, the operations officer, said. He probably isn't just for a bunker. Now, if we see that Iraqi brigade that's 2 hours northeast of us coming down that road, then he'll get concerned, and so will I, Corey said without a smile. I'll sure feel better when the rest of our TOWs and the convoy arrives, he thought. Major David, executive officer of Battle Force, had been drafted by Colonel Hall to develop the plan for the convoy to travel from the Iraq-Saudi border to Objective Cobra. Although the brigade had a full staff, it seemed they didn't have the expertise to make such a plan. David was an excellent officer, and his intelligence intimidated Colonel Hall to some extent. David would lead the convoy the 110 miles across the desert, and therefore he placed Battle Force elements in the lead. 10 TOW vehicles performed as security on the flanks of the convoy's lead elements, along with several cargo Humvees equipped with saws and M60 machine guns on top of the cabs. The convoy consisted of not only the brigade's vehicles, but also the 5,000-gallon HEMTT tankers for the aircraft refuel point and ammunition for every weapons system in Objective Cobra, to include small arms, artillery and rockets, and Hellfire rockets for the AH-64 helicopters. A total of 700 vehicles would eventually follow this trail across the desert. Sir, how long do you figure before we reach the objective? Leonard, David's driver, asked. Leonard, I figured we could make the trip in just over 4 hours. However, I didn't calculate us stopping so damn many times to change tires, David grumbled. We've been driving, 6 hours now? We should be coming up on the checkpoint soon. David checked his GPS tracker and looked down at his map for the 100th time. Sir, we didn't expect to be driving through these areas of flint. The flint rock is cutting tires to ribbons. We've been driving an hour and have had to stop 6 times already to change tires. At this rate, we'll run out of tires, Leonard pointed out. I'm not worried about the tires on the Hummers as they're run-flat tires. The deuce and a halfs, however, are another story, and so are those fuel and water tankers. We run out of tires for them. This whole thing could become an exercise in futility, David stated. Those big rigs have some pretty thick tires, sir. They may get cut, but cut to the point of leaking air, I don't think you need to worry, Leonard said. Leonard, I get paid the big bucks to worry about everything. Well, sir, you can stop worrying. I think that's Command Sergeant Major Nichols' vehicle on that crest. We're there, sir, Leonard said, looking over at David, who had just looked up from his map. A smile finally appeared. Chapter 54. Ground Attack. 26 May, 1991. G-Day. McCafferty, how soon could you launch your attack? General Luck asked at 1300 hours, 8 hours after the 101st had taken Fob Cobra. Sir, I'm not scheduled to roll until later tonight, but if you give me the word, my brigades can launch in 30 minutes. Why? What's happened? McCafferty, the commander of the 24th Mechanized Division, asked. Nothing's happened. The 101st and everyone else to your left is unopposed, except for some minor crap. The 1st of the 327th came upon an Iraqi infantry battalion from the 48th Iraqi Division and captured the entire battalion. The counterattack we were expecting against the 101st hasn't materialized, and doesn't appear that it will, so I want you to launch your attack now. If they won't come to us, we'll go to them. Let me know when you're on your way, General Luck directed. Yes, sir, McCafferty said enthusiastically. Turning to his operations officer, he instructed him, give the order to attack in 30 minutes. Sir, we're getting reports from the 3rd Armored Cav Regiment giving us positions of the 48th and 26th Divisions. The Cav says they're running through them like shit through a goose and meeting almost no resistance. They're telling the prisoners to just sit on the ground, and someone will be along to police them up. It's a repeat of the UAE operation, the operations officer said. Good. Let's see if we can beat the 101st to the Euphrates River, McCafferty said, as he headed for the command track. First of the 4th Cav Squadron, the Quarter Cav as they were known, had a long heritage of combat actions stretching from the Civil War to the present day and including every conflict along the way. Organized with 2 troops consisting of Abrams tanks and cavalry fighting vehicles, it also had 2 ground troops along with lift helicopters and attack aircraft. Their mission was to breach the Iraqi initial positions forward of the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Lying on the ground, 4 soldiers had crawled within 20 meters of the berm the Iraqis had placed in front of their positions. The Saudi berm lay 5 clicks to their rear. In front of the berm was a tank ditch where the spoil for the berm came from, and in front of the ditch was the concertina wire that had to be removed. Each soldier had a Bangalore torpedo. In a whisper, Staff Sergeant Billings said, Clements, you move to the left. Carter, you're next to him. I'll be next to you, and Dobbins, you're on the right. 5 meters between us, and don't ignite until you get the word. Then get the hell out of here. Got it? Everyone acknowledged, as they had gone over this several times in the past 2 days. Okay, move out. Each member crawled to his respective position and waited for the signal, which would be easy to identify. It was every combat vehicle in the squadron opening fire on the Iraqi positions. Once in position, each soldier shoved his torpedo under the wire, ensuring that it was squarely in position. When the shooting started, each ignited his torpedo and scurried back a safe distance before the horrific explosions occurred. Holy shit! Look at that hole we made, Clements said in amazement. He had practiced with the Bangalore torpedoes, but had never actually fired one. Get out of the way, here come the dozers, Billings said as the dust settled, and an Abrams tank with a plow blade appeared, followed by several others, each with round steel culverts that were pushed into the tank ditch, all under the withering fire from the squadron. Once the last culvert was dropped, a bulldozer came forward, crossed over the culverts, and began pushing down the berm, while infantry soldiers scampered up the berm on both sides of the dozer and engaged Iraqi positions. When the dozer broke through, the tanks and Cav vehicles of the squadron followed through. "Sarge, the combat dozers are still pushing dirt. We're through, so why don't they stop?" Clements asked, dropping an empty magazine out of his M16. "Those are Iraqi bunkers that they're dozing. I just hope the Iraqis aren't still in those bunkers," Billing commented. Within hours, the squadron was leading the 1st Infantry Division 10 miles into Iraq. There was no stopping them now. 1st British Armored Division, positioned behind the 1st U.S. Infantry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division, initially crushed through the 27th Iraqi Division with no difficulty. The 1st Cav breached the initial defensive line, and the 1st British poured through. As had been noted previously, the Iraqi command couldn't coordinate his artillery with his maneuver forces, and there was an absence of initiative to maneuver on the part of the Iraqi command. On their own, the 1st British came upon the 12th Armored Division in a defensive posture, and, using artillery and air power along with maneuver, had pretty much decimated that division by the end of the day, a day that had gone much better than anyone could have imagined. Lieutenant Colonel Moore, commander of the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars, was a bit surprised at the day's actions. "Sergeant Major," Colonel Moore said, as the Sergeant Major approached with 2 canteen cups of tea. "Sir, I thought you might like a cup," the Sergeant Major said, handing him one. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. How are the lads doing?" Moore asked, blowing over the top of the cup. "Sir, the lads are fine. Full of piss and vinegar, as they say. I didn't have the heart to tell them that those T-55 tanks were no match for our chieftains. No point in deflating the men at this point. They've been beating up on these poor Iraqi chaps so bad it's almost a shame," the Sergeant Major said. "Well, we move out in a few hours, and it appears that we're going to be running into the first of the 1st Republican Guard Corps divisions, the 3rd Tawakalna Mechanized Division. They have T-72s and BMPs, so this will be a bit more of a challenge," Moore indicated. "Word has it, sir, that the flyboys have been pounding the daylights out of that division for the past 2 weeks, the Sergeant Major observed. "That's what we're being told, but I won't believe it until I see it. Pilots have a habit of exaggerating their accomplishments. When we get home, I'm sure they'll tell the world that they did it all by themselves, winning the bloody war. I want the lads to think that this is still a tough fight that we cannot let up on. This isn't over yet. Let's not get overconfident until we're on our way home. There's still a fight ahead."
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.